Welcome to Manager Tools. This is Sarah.
And I'm Mark.
Today's cast, the simple quarterly performance review.
This cast answers these questions. How often do you recommend reviewing my direct reports? What should I cover in my quarterly reviews? What is the format of a quarterly review?
If you want answers to these questions and more, keep listening. Manager Tools will be visiting Chicago in just a few weeks. See us there, February 25th and 26th. To learn more, register online now at manager-tools.com/register. So, Mark, very few managers give enough regular feedback, which is important because feedback is the single most important tool managers have to improve their direct's performance.
Agreed.
Now, remember, folks, when we say feedback over here at Manager Tools, we don't just mean talking to them when they've done things that are wrong. That is, we would generally recommend in terms of feedback, our positive to negative feedback ratio ideally is 9-1. 9 positive for 1 negative. Now, part of the reason that, again, managers don't give very much regular feedback is because they mistakenly believe performance reviews are their big contribution, if you will, to performance management.
Maybe one of the 10 biggest mistakes or myths or misunderstandings that managers have.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it literally erodes the foundation of organizations. Yeah.
Exactly. And folks, the thing is, and the reason this is true, is annual performance reviews happen too rarely to even make a difference in terms of the day-to-day behavior of the people on our team. Performance is behavior, and behavior is happening daily.
Daily,
exactly. So we need a tool to connect regular feedback with that annual event review, and that tool is the quarterly performance review.
Yeah. So let me just run through our outline real quick. So we're going to define first what a quarterly performance review or QPR is. I just will say this at the top of the show that I generally say quarterly performance review rather than QPR, even though QPR is fine and you will hear us use that acronym here. The problem with QPR is if you get more senior or if you get into executive ranks, QPR sounds very much like QBR, which is a quarterly business review. And quarterly business reviews are one version of a steel cage deathmatch meeting. You can go into a QBR, and if you didn't meet your numbers, if you didn't deliver whatever systems the business needs, if you're not directly involved in selling to customers, you could literally lose your job. The senior people are involved and so on. So we'll call them QPRs as a matter of administrative convenience today. But the fact is that you should be careful about using that if your organization also uses QPRs. Okay. After we define it, we're going to talk about how to prepare. The preparation is dead simple. We're going to talk about how to deliver it in detail. And then 2 more pieces of related guidance. One is how to keep it informal. Anytime you get past daily feedback, there is a tendency for managers to make things more formal. And in fact, when you talk to senior executives, they will tell you, I don't care how formal it is. Certainly performance reviews as part of a much larger organizational system, there's some formality there, but keeping it informal massively increases the chances for your directs to learn. And the last thing, we can make a brief comment about incorporating semi-annual reviews, because some companies do require not only an annual review, but some version of a semi-annual review.
Exactly. All right. So, folks, we're going to start with what is a quarterly performance review. Now, essentially, a quarterly performance review, again, to Mark's point, QPR we may use in this cast, is a slimmed down review of an employee's performance over the previous quarter. It's a 15 to 30-minute conversation where you review successes and missteps during the previous quarter and also talk about the goals and changes for the quarter coming up. So one way of thinking about it is a QPR isn't so much a micro view or preview of the annual review, so much as it's a macro review of their behaviors in the quarter that's being discussed.
And I think that's important because if it is a micro future view of their performance review, giving a sense of how they would do if they did 3 more quarters like this in a Q1 QPR, then that makes it more formal. That makes them think about compensation and so on. So yeah, good.
Yeah.
Now look, Sarah said slim down. That's because all too often, at least in our experience, consulting to companies all over the world, the full review, if you were to use a full annual review and give each of your directs a full annual review each quarter, that would become very quickly too administratively burdensome.
Yeah.
Filling out an entire annual review, all the numbers and all of the qualitative aspects where you have to write things, specific things in writing about how people did and keeping it into the form and so on is just too much. Frankly, annual reviews in most organizations cover too much. You know, I've joked with people and I'm always surprised that they don't get this. But again, that's my fault. I've just known it for 30 years and forgotten that everybody else doesn't know it. That executives, you know, you're a true executive when you don't get a performance review. And people are like, really? People at the top don't get performance reviews? What's interesting about that is, no, they don't. And there are 2 reasons why they don't. One is because other executives don't hold themselves accountable to do reviews. It's all just it's in my head and I'll talk to my boss and you don't need to know, but here's your compensation kind of thing. That's not where the quote comes from, where if you're an executive, you know it because you don't get a performance review. That reason is because the definition of an executive is one whose performance review comes out every quarter in the Wall Street Journal. Meaning you are literally running a line of business and the company reported its quarterly earnings. And in the quarterly earnings, every division's earnings and results get reported. And if that's the case, we don't care about anything else other than things that affect our ability to raise money in the markets because stock price matters for all kinds of reasons, many good, some bad. So in several cases we're aware of, and I was shocked when I heard this first time, although there's a good reason and a bad reason for it, some companies won't let you use their annual review system. It's usually online, and they won't let you use it more than once a year. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that. Most of them are stupid, but that serves our purpose here because if that's the case for you, that's good because you don't have to use it. What's funny is I know some companies who say, sure, people could use it all the time, and they don't advertise that. They don't communicate that. And managers don't know that they're supposed to do a quarterly check.
Right.
Now, sometimes people ask me, and you and I have had this conversation before, sometimes people ask me, well, why do we do it quarterly? Well, the answer to that was in the story I just told, because your organization, many, not all, but many organizations that we serve, certainly the public company organizations, but private companies, private equity companies, venture capital companies, portfolio companies, and so on do this as well. They report on a quarterly basis because you don't want to not report and then suddenly get a surprise at the end of the year. Now, an organization says, well, you can't use our system. Okay, there's good and bad about that. But frankly, at least intellectually, organizations know that they should want more performance conversations to occur. Unfortunately, they don't facilitate that. They don't teach that. They don't measure that. And gosh, if you don't measure it, folks, it's not going to happen. I've said this before. I'll say it many times before I truly do retire. And that is the things that get measured are the things that get done. And the things that get measured and reported and rewarded are the things that get done well. And that's an important enough phrase that the guy who wrote about it 30 or 40 or 50 years ago, the title of the book is The Greatest Management Principle in the World, which I can't argue with him about that because the lack of measurement affects everything. But how many organizations measure how much individual managers give individual feedback to their people?
Exactly.
They don't. There's only one place where they do, and it's sales.
Yeah.
because they care so much
They
about
care
that
so
number.
much about
and either
it.
you got your number or you didn't get your number.
Uh-huh.
And they break it down to weeks and months and quarters. And you could have 3 good weeks and then a bad week and end up not making your monthly number. And they want those performance conversations to happen. Why? Because it pays for everybody else's salary.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. This goes back to something that I think about all the time, Mark. As you know, what we're teaching people, we're talking about management, talking about the purpose of the organization, helping managers essentially understand what all of these things, performance review, for example, exist to do. And unfortunately, I would suggest that because there is a lack of understanding on the part of the organization, and that may be the people in HR who are facilitating the performance review,
part of it.
all the way down to the managers, because there's a lack of understanding about its purposes. It can be used as performance. It can be used as succession planning. It can be used as a blend of the two, but no one is really clear about which of those it is.
Which leads to everybody hating it so
Exactly.
much, in part.
In part, exactly. So there's a lot of things that cause this confusion essentially around what is it? How often is this thing? Can I use the form I'm given by the central department more often or not? And no one knows. And you could ask and you probably won't get a clear answer. So it's almost as
Which
if
is funny.
You shouldn't.
It's funny to think that this organization is a sealed entity to a degree and no one knows. The idea that no one knows just seems wildly bad.
Wildly bad. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, folks, essentially, using your organizational review system also makes this quarterly performance appraisal so much more formal than is frankly necessary. It makes the direct feel like they're getting an annual review. And why wouldn't it, right? This is quite reminiscent of that once a year thing that we all do and we all hate.
Yeah.
So we would suggest that because most managers and employees hate their review system, there are all kinds of reasons for it, many of them administrative application and burden, that when it comes to the delivery of a review, you could potentially choose a way that's not the central way. The biggest reasons that people, managers and directs dislike the review is managers do a pretty poor job of preparing and delivering the review. And then the tensions that exist around reviews being connected to compensation conversations and all of the other things that make that time of the year event stressful means that while you could reuse that annual appraisal if you want, it might be more stressful than is necessary.
Yeah, that's a good sort of encapsulation in a broad sense of the issue of formality and informality. Everyone thinks their annual performance review is formal, even if the boss prepares as it's informal. And in fact, the boss is unprepared, delivers it poorly, and it's very rare that you can do something poorly and then act like it's a formal thing. Now, Sarah just mentioned about compensation because typically in most organizations, annual performance reviews and compensation conversations go together. And that adds to the fear and uncertainty and doubt that people go into the review with. And because it is a discussion about your family's future ability to afford their lifestyle and so on, that makes it more formal. That said, anytime we talk about performance reviews, I always tell people we have never, nor will we ever recommend separating annual performance reviews from compensation conversations. In every place we've ever seen that done, and in theory, it's a reasonable idea. It is. Like, we don't want this to be about that, so we'll separate the two. The problem is now that means managers have to have two separate conversations, right?
Yeah.
And now in order to do it, they have to interact with two separate administratively difficult systems. And that makes for very difficult conversations. And I can remember specifically when one company in Silicon Valley separated the two because some consultants said they should to reduce the tension about performance reviews. By the way, the consultant didn't realize that the tension in performance reviews is largely caused by really gross, overly burdensome, administratively difficult systems, along with managers' gross under preparation. And if we solved those two things, nobody would mind. Nobody would bother with the compensation thing being an issue, but they separated them. And the first thing every employee asks, even though they've been told repeatedly, hey, we're doing it differently this year, we're having performance here and compensation there, they would immediately say to the boss, okay, can you give me a preview? Can I go home and tell my spouse like how much I'm going to get next year?
Yeah.
And it was just like literally the end of the conversation, boom.
Yeah.
Like just a lead balloon, just horrible.
Also, doesn't it kind of feel like 2 reviews? And I mean, I know everyone listening to this loves their annual appraisal and wishes they could get more of them. But I also think to myself, isn't it like just like stacking 2 stressful things?
Yes, it is.
In an effort to make both of them a little less stressful. And now it's just like
stupid consultants thinking they can solve a problem and ended up making it worse.
Making it worse, like twice as bad.
Simplicity is usually the answer when it comes to this.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Now, folks, Mark has talked a little bit about managers' lack of effectiveness in preparing and delivering performance reviews. And unfortunately, if that's you, we have help for you. We know that you probably don't have a lot of organizational support in preparing and delivering well those reviews. So we've got some guidance in a podcast or series of podcasts in our Hall of Fame surrounding or about reviews. If you're a licensee and you're reading our guidance, you can find links to those casts and therefore the show notes for those podcasts at the bottom of this podcast's show notes. Now, if you're a listener, and perhaps the reason you're listening is because you're not a licensee, you can go to the podcast's webpage at manager-tools.com, this podcast's webpage, and there will be links to the audio of those additional delivering and preparing for performance review podcasts as well. We would name them all, but we'll just attach them here.
If you don't know how to do that, if you just go to manager-tools.com and in the search bar at the top, type in simple quarterly performance review. I did this myself. The first link that comes up is to this cast. You click on that link. It'll tell you that it's a podcast and that you can go and you can find the related casts. The 2 big casts are how to prepare for, which includes gathering raw material and then writing the cast, writing the review. Most people don't know there are actually 2 distinct forms of how you qualitatively write your write-ups and a review, and then also how to deliver the review. And that cast is now nearly 20 years old, and I review it every year in part because it comes out every year between Thanksgiving and Christmas because so many people are writing reviews then as a reminder for people. And every year I review it, I read it through, and I haven't changed it one jot or tittle in 19 years because the systems are still broken, but this is a way to be your best within a broken system.
Exactly. We are here to support your hiring practices to ensure you hire the right person the first time. The Manager Tools Effective Hiring Manager Training brings a company approach and process, as well as teaches, with practice, effective interviewing skills such as probing, taking notes, knowing when to listen, and when to ask for clarification. For more details, contact Maggie by emailing her at customerservice@manager-tools.com. Now we're going to talk a little bit about how to prepare for this quarterly performance review. Because again, we have podcasts about how to prepare for the annual. This is the preparation of this quarterly. And folks, this is super simple. Remind your direct. As
opposed to a big review.
Yeah, exactly.
This is dead simple.
Yeah, exactly. Remind your direct in there one-on-one the week before you plan on having your quarterly performance review the next week. Say, so a week in advance. You can email them the form you use. We recommend using our Manager Tools one-page performance review structure, which we will discuss in a minute here, and just ask them to fill out. Handwritten is fine. Just jot in what they did well, what they need to work on, and some goals for the next quarter.
I'll just say right now, just a brief aside, my favorite part of this guidance is handwritten. I remember the first time I saw a review of a vice president and business unit leader, essentially a general manager, with maybe $600 million gross revenue and maybe 130 or 40, as I recall, profit. So, net profit. So pretty good margin. At General Electric, this was 28, 30 years ago. And it was given to him by the senior vice president of the business unit that his business unit led up to, right? An industrial group. And it was handwritten.
Yeah. Dead simple.
And he actually told his admin, now the senior vice president had like 2 admins. He said to the admin, I've written this out. I want you to fax it to him. And the guy had a fax because faxes were used back then. And I remember very clearly the guy had a very good review and he had folded up the fax. And then he was kind of embarrassed because he liked the fact that it was a fax and that it was not formal, that it was not a contract, that it didn't come in a FedEx thing, and he didn't have to report to somewhere and sign for it. He said, this is the way it should be done. We're not making this a dance, a formal dance with all kinds of formality to it. Just exactly. Just dead simple. Tell me. Yeah. And by the way, this is helped by the fact that a lot of more senior people are high D's and high I's, and they don't want a lot of formality. They want directness. They want clarity. They don't want pomp and circumstance, as you said. They want it simple. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you tell them to handwrite it. Okay. And we'll talk more about that. And then ask them to send it to you no later than 24 hours before your QPR meeting with them during your one-on-one next week. If your calendar looks full, you can use your portion of the next one-on-one to discuss their QPR. You can schedule a separate meeting. People are always complaining to me about my schedule's too busy. I said, well, okay. But one of the things we teach executives, and many managers who are listening to this could in fact benefit from this, is virtually everything you do, every meeting you go to has 3 phases. The meeting itself, but preparation before and follow-up afterwards. Usually the preparation before is reading and prepping, writing, and then the after is communication. So you put some time on your calendar to prepare for it, and you actually deliver it. But frankly, the way I used to do it, and I told tens of thousands of other managers to do it, is just doing it during your one-on-one. Yeah. And make your one-on-one prep a little longer that week so you can be ready to deliver the QPR.
Yeah. Well, we say when we're talking to managers about one-on-ones, the standard for one-on-one completion is not 100%. As long as 80% of your one-on-ones are occurring, you'll receive the benefit of 100. So if you borrow, let's say, this 30-minute one-on-one for a different purpose, quarterly performance review, and you're still having all of your other one-on-ones, you're not doing disservice to the one-on-ones. That's the thing. Like, you're not harming the one-on-one. It's just, hey, we're going to skip our normal agenda. We're going to keep our time, do this. We'll resume normal operating the week after next.
One-on-one matters. It is the system and the time and the commitment and the trust that builds over 50 of them in the course of the year.
That is exactly it. Yeah.
And by the way, if you tell them handwriting is okay, tell them, and if they'll probably wonder, oh no, I need to impress my boss. I need to type it and put it on a form. Tell them you'll be handwriting your inputs and you'll email them or you'll text them a picture of your inputs 24 hours before the meeting is scheduled as well.
Yeah, exactly. And then, folks, the only thing left is really to spend 10 to 15 minutes going over your past one-on-one notes from the previous weeks and filling in the 3 sections on your quarterly performance review, which we'll discuss in detail next.
Now, good. So how do you deliver it? So the smart way to connect regular feedback. Now, we could have a whole other cast about whether or not you're giving feedback, folks. A lot of our casts now, after 20 years, we indicate that this is building upon other fundamentals that you should be engaging in. And if you're not doing one-on-ones and you're not giving feedback, this may sound like a great system, but you begin to see that you don't have any of the raw material. Yeah. You don't have the trust. You don't have the documentation week to week. You're not talking about performance week to week in a way that is encouraging. We just recently put out a Manager Tools cast called The Purpose of Feedback, which is to encourage effective future behavior. All feedback is about encouragement, despite what the average idiot manager does. And so, again, we want to connect regular feedback, and some of you just had a light bulb go off and say, ooh, I'm not doing feedback. So you may have to wait a little bit until you start doing QPRs, until you get into the disciplined habits of being an effective manager, which includes one-on-ones to build trust and the manager tools feedback model to deliver performance communications, which are the two most important behaviors that effective managers engage in. So we mentioned before, the best way to do a quarterly performance review is to use our one-page performance review document. This is basically, we used this phrase earlier, a slimmed down version of an annual review that's, what's the word? Omnidirectional or useful. You can use it. Anybody can use it. It doesn't matter what your annual system is. If you're a licensee, you can go to the webpage for the Manager Tools one-page performance review podcast. And if you're signed in, you can either download a doc version of it or a PDF format of it. You don't have to create it yourself. But look, if you're not a licensee, it won't be hard once we walk you through it. And I think for those of you on YouTube, Sarah's going to show it to you, a vision of it, so you don't have to just rely on our verbalizing of it.
Exactly. So folks, essentially it's a piece of paper, let's call it split into 3 sections. So if you're watching us on YouTube, you can see this image of the performance review. Essentially, all I've got written at the top is employee name, quarterly performance review. Then I've got the date delivered. And we've got in the leftmost column, the first section, if you will, at the top left, strengths/successes. This is where you list the behaviors and performance that over the course of the last quarter were deemed effective. Anything you noticed in the quarter that went well. Maybe they brought in a project on time and on budget. Maybe they helped a direct get through onboarding early. And because of that, this individual is now contributing significantly well in advance of any and all expectations. Maybe they helped a colleague when that colleague was out or on vacation or just in the office and incredibly overwhelmed. Maybe they learned how to run a meeting or served on a committee, and you heard that they did an indispensable job. Their role was incredibly valued on that committee. You can think of this, if you're familiar with some of our other guidance about the hot wash, this section would be thought of as kind of synonymous with the what went well portion of the hot wash guidance, which is also linked in these show notes and again on this podcast's page on our website at manager-tools.com.
Great. So if you could show it again, Sarah, so the YouTube audience can see it. So the second section is at the top right is opportunities. There you list behaviors and performance that wasn't effective. Anything in the quarter that went poorly. Perhaps they missed deadlines. Maybe they didn't complete a project successfully. It may be that you'll be talking about that project in the next phase of guidance for the next quarter. Maybe they failed to communicate around an outage or a safety issue. Maybe they had a relationship problem with a colleague. All too often, I have found that when managers think about performance, they forget to include relationships and communication as core parts of performance. Maybe you heard from a client that they were difficult to work with, or they were well behind on their deliverables. All those kinds of things would go in it. Yeah.
And again, if we haven't talked about one-on-ones enough, we shall again. Those managers doing one-on-ones are very quickly going to realize that their one-on-one notes should be a great source of specific behaviors to make a note of on this form in the QPR. You only have, at most, 12 or so, let's call it, one-on-one documents to mine for this raw material. It's happening quarterly. There aren't more than 12 weeks in a quarter. So it shouldn't take more than 10 minutes to review those 12
and find the raw material.
Sets of one-on-one. Exactly. And if you review those notes and you find those notes lacking, this will be for you, manager, a very good reminder to take better notes in your one-on-ones. Right? Good notes in a one-on-one are both great for memory. Writing things down is a great way to retain that information for future. So the writing down alone of the notes is good. Exactly. Will get you a step ahead when it comes to the filling out of these forms. And perhaps these notes are even better so that you can refer to them for quarterly and annual review preparation efforts as well.
Yeah. There's an additional bonus of using quarterly performance reviews relative to annual reviews. If you're familiar with our annual performance review prep guidance, we recommend going back through all your one-on-one notes over the year for raw material, making sure the annual review doesn't fall prey to recency effects, recency biases, and other sort of biases. Doing QPRs every quarter will make it so that when you do an annual review, you won't have to go through 50 weeks of one-on-one notes for each direct, but rather only the latest 10 to 12 weeks of the quarter that you're in and the QPR notes for the previous quarters, right? Because those QPR notes are a compilation of all of the one-on-one notes for the previous quarter. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Okay, that takes me back then to our quarterly performance review sheet. And the very last section, the section at the bottom of the page, is guidance for next year. This is where you can have a notable impact on your direct's future behavior over the course or in the next quarter itself.
Right.
Obviously, if you're using our annual performance review sheet, you're going to want to change what says the section on our guidance for next year to next quarter, right?
Sure.
Change the wording if you're using the annual sheet, make some edits. There you go.
Yeah.
Easy as that.
Now, when we talk about the guidance section for the next quarter, you're going to quickly realize your guidance is easily broken into 3 parts. First, obviously, you're going to encourage to continue their successes, the behaviors that led to their successes relative to plans, goals, and deliverables for the next quarter, obviously. Giving them an example maybe of how what they did last quarter could be repeated in upcoming work streams or projects or meetings or teamwork or collaboration, communication, relationships, and obviously goals and deliverables that they have that are already on the books. And you can use the same mindset for reviewing and encouraging them in the opportunities section. What do you want to see them do differently? What projects do you want them to handle differently? And how do you want them to be better? What outcomes did they not achieve that you want them to complete? It's really very simple. It's all based on behavior.
Exactly. And third, and finally, in the guidance section, you're going to want to give them new or more specific behaviors, tasks, deliverables that you're wanting to see.
Yep.
The purpose of coming up with this list of future guidance is to give them as much information as they need to actually do those things. The less concrete you are in this section, the less likely it is that they're going to achieve what you want them to achieve in the next quarter. Concrete, behavioral, something that they can either replicate or change.
Yep.
Essentially.
Easy. Yeah. Okay. Our next section is how to keep it informal. And this is pretty straightforward, right? As we said, we want QPRs to be informal because performance feedback is best done informally. The more formal you make it, the less likely the direct is going to hear what you're talking about and more likely to fear the repercussions of a potential mistake. If you tell everybody that the only way you give feedback is to call them into your office and close the door, A, they're going to assume it's negative. When you actually give them positive feedback, they're going to be surprised and they won't hear the positive. And it just makes things much, much worse. But we've already covered the formality part a little bit. QPRs are nothing more than aggregated performance communications, okay? On the other hand, more importantly, performance reviews, which again, we all hate, tend to be more formal. Again, this is not a mini review, guys.
Yeah.
It's a macro behavioral discussion. So that's why we mentioned the QPR, using QPR. If you wanted to change the name, of course you could.
Yeah.
But you don't want to confuse it with the kind of formality and seriousness of a QPR. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And folks, there are 2 simple things that you can do to make a QPR more informal. First, the one we talked about substantially, Mark's favorite piece, handwrite your QPR notes. Don't type it up. Don't expect them to sign it.
Oh, God, no. Yeah.
Don't ask them to put all of their thoughts and ideas into a spreadsheet online. And folks, listen, we know handwriting may not actually be easier for you. We know that. I mean, some of you have handwriting. You're like, Sarah, I could handwrite it, but no one could read it. I mean, it's chicken scratch. And well, you're also in love with your laptop. So it makes perfect sense for you to want to type all the things all the time. But again, this typing sends a message that this is more formal. Whereas handwriting sends a contrary message.
Yes.
This isn't part of an organizational system. This is an informal review between the two of us. These notes are going to sit in my one-on-one notebook or my one-on-one note-taking folder. It's not getting driven up the chain so that the organization has a formal record of what's happening here. And it allows for you and your direct to have just that, a conversation about the last 90 days, a discussion about what happened. And when it comes to the creating and sharing of this form, again, because you're not typing it up, what you would do is just take a picture of it on your phone, text it to them, and now you're done. Shared. Ask them to do the same with their notes as well.
Yeah.
For the QPR. Just take pictures, send them back and forth, save the final copy. Done.
Yeah, good.
Because we don't have fax machines.
Yeah.
Anymore.
Good one. Good one. Yeah. Wisdom only comes to those who have experienced fax machines, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I think.
That's right. The second thing you could do is to make it a conversation. Don't make it a presentation. Speaking of which, you don't need them to present to you what they have in their document. They send it to you in advance so you can incorporate what they said into yours. And if it's handwritten, you could just transcribe some of the stuff they wrote down that you left out into theirs. I always liked it when one of my folks handwrote something in the opportunities area. Said, well, you missed this, Mark. I didn't do that as well. I thought, wow, that is a great example of statement against interest, but also somebody who's interested in development. And I love that. Yeah. Annual reviews are too often a presentation of a conclusion that's already been reached, right? You have to prepare and write and so on. So when you mention something in QPR, ask for agreement. When they had items on any of their sections that are different than yours, acknowledge them. Write them down on your form. When they agree to work on something, thank them and make a note of it, handwritten, of what they said. Show them that this is an ongoing thing, that this is not a formal encapsulation of your previous quarter that could hypothetically be used against you in the end of the year. Rather, it's, hey, let's take a look, not at 30,000 feet like we would at the end of the year, but maybe just 1,000 feet. Let's you and I be on the same page about what I'm seeing in your behavior, what you're seeing in your behavior, and let's get on the same page so we don't get to the end of the year and in a formal process that will affect next year's compensation, have us be at loggerheads. We don't want that. This is a bit like one of my favorite psychological or sociological concepts is something called the pinch crunch model, which we've talked about before in Manager Tools, which is in every relationship you have, there will be pinches along the way. There are small things that happen and sometimes they disappear, but every once in a while pinches happen and they remain in people's heads and in their hearts about who embarrassed who or who insulted who or who was disrespectful or whatever. And if you don't resolve the pinches as they happen through candor and respect and in a dignified way, you end up having a crunch. And in addition, if you haven't resolved the smaller problems along the way, when you get to a crunch, your conflict resolution skills will not be effective and the crunch will lead to the end of a relationship, whether that's a professional relationship or a personal relationship. So the QPR is essentially a pinch crunch model for organizational behavior. And by organizational behavior, I mean individual behavior, which aggregates up into organizational performance.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we have to talk about semi-annual reviews.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. And we know that some organizations require a mid-year review. If there's a form, we certainly do not recommend that you get in trouble with the powers that be by not using your organization's required form for the semi-annual review. Now, in some cases, you may want to supplement that semi-annual review process form, if you will, with the details you're going to get out of the QPR system. But again, this goes back to when we were talking earlier about the overall annual review process. Sometimes they're pretty onerous.
Yeah.
And so fulfilling, I should say, one of these QPRs in order to prepare you to fill that thing out might be additional work on top of what is already an incredibly burdensome process. And we wouldn't necessarily recommend that.
And well, as most of our listeners probably know, organizations don't teach their performance review system other than here's how you log in.
Yeah.
And if they don't teach the annual review, they're definitely not going to give you a system for how to prepare the semi-annual review. So you still need some system to prepare for that. And the system you would use at the middle of the year is a QPR from the first quarter, and then your own self-work from a QPR of the second quarter. And certainly most organizations require the person who's being evaluated to do a self-review. And so you could tell them, let's just use the QPR as the system by which I'm able to gather data from both you and me to put into the semi-annual review system. Yeah, pretty simple.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want me to summarize?
Yeah, sure. Let's wrap it up.
Look, folks, QPRs are a great way to have a higher level of discussion about employee behaviors. Again, that 1,000-foot level, without all the drama, all the bureaucracy of an annual review. The data fit on one page, depending upon how big you write, obviously. The discussion is brief. It's conversational. You could do it in your half of a one-on-one. It covers both the previous quarter's behaviors, both effective and ineffective. We're all human. We make mistakes and we do good stuff. Don't leave out the effective stuff. Gosh, that's bad. And it lays out more guidance for more effective behavior in the next quarter. And it'll make your annual reviews that much easier to prepare and deliver and more easily accepted as well by the direct. Less drama, better results.
Yeah, exactly. Those little pieces of information before that one ultimate one at the end of the year can make, even if you have an incredibly onerous, very formal, if you will, annual review process, it can make it seem a little bit less stressful. Because they're getting little glimpses into what is probably going to be on that all the way through the year. It's not like they're only getting it once every 365 days. And that is a large source of the consternation and stress.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Mark.
A lot of fun.
Thank you so much, everyone. That's all for this week. Have a good one. And we'll meet you again next week with a brand new topic. Bye, everyone.